Hi everyone, welcome to another developer update on Kwyll. It's just another short one today. Haven't got a lot to add, but a few small features that have been included, all of which this time come from requests or in support of the work that the early access testers on Discord are using Kwyll for. So a couple of things I put in because I could see what they were doing and thought there would be a better way of doing that, and one a direct request. So I'll go straight into showing these features off and show you how they work. So if we switch to the editor very quickly, and two of the features are demonstrated in the standard overhead test game. So the first one is around colour. In fact, the first two are around colour. So as you can see, when you're in the sprite editor, all the sprite definitions are monochrome, as you'd expect on a spectrum, all black and white, white ink on black paper as a default. So the intention was always to be able to add some colour to the objects. It was always on the backlog, but some of the, as I say, one of the early testers is doing a game that would benefit greatly from being able to colour them now. So I thought I'd bubble that one up to the top a little bit, as I often tend to do when I see someone using something that I think is on the backlog that would be beneficial to them. So rather than doing it in the sprites, I thought long and hard about the best way to do this so that it works most cost effectively and effectively for the development, for work within the editor, and for working on the spectrum itself. So the sprites stay as simple white on black, just monochrome. The colour is applied in the objects instead. So if you select an object, you know, if you've seen any of the previous videos, you'll know that you assign sprites to an object in animations. So this simple bubble has one animation with 2 frames in it. And as you can see, that's just adopting the black and white, the white on black colouring of the default. But down here in the object properties, you've now got this new row or this new feature, which allows you to set a single ink colour. Now, I will possibly add the ability to change the paper colour, but in reality, because of the way that the spectrum works, it might not be that useful, so I didn't rush to do that. The ink colour is probably the most important thing, so I just did that to begin with. So you've got 2 entries in here. You've got a colour and you've got an enable flag. So if that is, as it currently is, disabled, it will just use the default colour, which I'll get to in a moment. If you enable it, it allows you to choose a colour, and it just changes here, and it'll change in the rooms and so on as well. So if we switch it back off, so I've added this new object type, which is using the same sprites as the bubble. So you can see that you can use the same sprites in different ways for different colours. This one does set the colour. Let's set it to cyan. It's a little bit more interesting. And then if you go to the rooms where you can use these objects, you'll see the object list where you can drag and drop adopts the new colour properly, and the same in the map when you've got the object list here to drag and drop into the map. That all works. And then when you go to the preview, at the moment it shows the new object with its correct colour. So that's all working, very simple, but I think that's going to be very useful to add a little bit more colour to the objects, which were up until now always white. You had no choice. So the other thing, and this is also in this game, demonstrated in this game, is you may have noticed when I went, oh no, I didn't show, but I'll show it now. This room over here, which is the interior room, it doesn't have tiles of blue painted throughout the entire room. If we go and have a look at it, it's actually just default colours. So what I've added is the ability to set in a map location. I'm using the term location now to differentiate between a room and a location. A room is a definition of a room with all of its interior and its objects and so on, and a location is an instance of that room on the map, and you can have multiple instances of the same room on a map, multiple locations using the same room. So this location, the house, there's a new location properties pop up, which allows you to find the name, which hasn't got much purpose apart from making it easy to identify in the list at the moment. But we've now got the ability to set the ink and paper colour. Now I mentioned back at the objects in the bubble where you don't set this single colour, it'll use the default colour. So that's where that default colour will come from now. If you use an object in here that doesn't have an explicit ink colour, it will use that default colour. And as you can see here, the tiles that don't have an attribute painted on them will adopt that colour as well. So these ones are all using the red ink that this room defines, even though in the room they're just ordinary. So if I actually just demonstrate this by putting some colour in here, so if I set it to green on blue there, and then we go to the map, you can see those ones now take their colour, but the rest are red. And if I change the house ink colour to cyan, then they'll adopt that colour. Change that back to red. So again, that works there. It works, I'll show you in a moment, it works on the export as well, but just to show you it in the preview very quickly. Actually, I'll explain one other thing which you may not have noticed, but the house itself in this opening scene has changed slightly, and that was because before the bricks were the red colour that you can see here was ink and the mortar was paper. Now I've had to add an ink colour to let me just show you, to the player. He is white, or they are white. I had to do that in order for it to work when we go inside in a moment, otherwise it would adopt the red ink of the interior room, which would look odd if he changed red as soon as he went indoors. But what that meant was when you walk the character over here, it would turn, because it was red bricks with a white mortar, it would turn all the red bricks to white on a white mortar, which meant as you walked across here it just turned completely white, which I can show you on the emulator. Obviously you can't see it, the emulator, you can't see it in the simulator because we don't do the colour, but that was a problem. And similarly I jumped in a bit too quickly there. Similar with the door was green ink with black paper, and I've inverted the tiles on this now, so it's basically green paper with black ink. And that's just a tip there for when you're creating these things, when you're going to be having characters or objects that walk over parts of the background, is to try and minimize the amount of ink use. So if you've got a tile that's got lots of ink and not so much paper, it's worth thinking about inverting those, because then as the objects walk over these tiles, the impact on the colorization and the color clash effect will be minimized. And again, I'll show you that when we go into the emulator. But if we go inside, you can see the player stays white, but the rest of the room adopts the new color scheme that's defined by that location on the map. So just to show this all working in the emulator on the Spectrum, I'll do a quick export. It takes a few moments, as we know. While it's doing that, just a quick reminder: if you could hit the subscribe button, that's really helpful. It would help push this content out to more people who might be interested in retro game creation. And if you like what you're seeing, hit the like button. Also, as an aside, I've started up a Patreon for Kwyll. I've always had the coffee page, but the Patreon gives me a little bit more control over what I can share. So in the future, as I'm doing more content around tutorials or sample content, I might make that available on the Patreon first before going to YouTube. So if you do want to take part or contribute to the development of Kwyll, and you're interested, pop over to the Patreon. It has the same subscription tier, the silver tier, which gets you the same, at the moment, the same benefits, which is access to the closed room in Discord, which is where I both share the links to the in-progress versions for you to play with, usually 1 or 2 a week, maybe a bit more depending on how things go, but usually fairly frequently. And more importantly, perhaps, you'll have direct access to me to ask questions, ask for features, and if you pop into Discord and just chat to the people there, I'm sure they'll confirm that I do try to be as responsive as I can and implement features or fixes as quickly as I can to keep people moving, so you're getting some value out of that. So do pop over to Patreon if you feel that you'd like to contribute to supporting the development of Kwyll. Okay, so that's finished exporting now. So if we switch quickly over to the emulator and open the resulting file up. So firstly, you can see that the sprite, the collectible, is cyan as defined and responds as normal. This is where I mentioned you can see the difference. So before, as the player was walking across this area, the whole of where the player is turned white on white, which obviously not ideal. So this, just by inverting those brick tiles and changing the colour slightly, makes it just a little bit less. You lose a little bit less through the colour clash than you would otherwise. It's manageable. And the same with the door. So you can see by inverting the ink to be the lines rather than the background, that you're minimising how much changes. And if we go into the room, you can see that just does exactly as you'd expect as well, with the green tiles that I assigned and the player staying white but everything else going red on blue. So that's colour. It's fairly simple to demonstrate, but I'm sure you can see the potential there is quite big for making the games a lot more interesting visually. So the other thing that I did this time round was one of the developers, again, as I say, these changes are all been influenced in some form by the early adopters. One developer had created a really interesting demo of a character or a sprite that can move in multiple directions, 8 or 16, but lots of directions, and had created an incredibly detailed logic tree to make that happen, which basically did for each possible direction had a, if the direction is this, move the object in this and by this amount and this amount in X and Y. If not, and then if the direction is something else, and so on, all through all 8 or 16 directions, which created, it worked, but it created a very complex tree that would be very difficult to manage. So we chatted briefly on the closed channel about what tools might make that a little bit less painful. Came up with a new node type, which is, I'm calling it select, and this is the demo for it. So if I go quickly to the object, I've just created a simple object, again importing the usual sprites, and this is the logic. So there's some standard boilerplate stuff in here. So we're checking the fire button. If the fire button is pressed, then first of all, if it is pressed, check to see if a debounce, we've got two variables here, direction and debounce. The debounce is used to prevent it just flicking really quickly. So what it does is, if debounce is 0, then it goes on and does the move, sets debounce to 1, and then increments the direction. So it increments the direction variable, and then checks if it's greater than 3 and sets it back to 0. So just cycling it through 0, 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3. I'd like to at some point wrap this functionality into something like a clamp, but for now those are doing that. So just to finish off the debounce excuse me, part, so once debounce is 1 as set here, the next time through, if the fire button is pressed, it will get to here, identify that debounce is not equal to 0 and do nothing. So it just cancels and stops out there. So while you're holding the fire button, debounce remains 1, and it won't do anything else. As soon as you release the fire button, the next time through it will detect that the fire button isn't pressed, and through the false path set the debounce to 0, which means next time through you can push the fire button again. So it just controls that you can only fire 1 at a time, so it makes it more manageable. Now the most important part in this one though is this bit here, which is calculating the position to move when the fire button is validly pressed, and this is the important part here, the new node. So what I've done is, in order to mitigate this need for lots of if-thens for comparisons, I've created this new node that takes in a single integer value, the index, and on the node itself you can define a list of values. So we've got 4 here. You can add more. There's no limit at the moment, but there will be. I will impose a limit at some point for common sense reasons to minimize the cost when you export. But you can add as many in here as you like. So for example, if the developer was doing something that had 16 directions, you'd have 16 values in here for the X. So you can add them and remove them. If I add, you can move them up and down, so you can shuffle them. So if I move the 0 right to the top, so you got some control over defining that array. And what it'll do is it'll take in that index, and depending on this mode, you've got 2 modes of operation, wrap or clamp, which basically define what happens if the index is outside of this range. So if the index is less than 0 and you're in wrap mode, it will wrap round to the start, to the end. So it'll go -1 would come back round to here and then carry on through. And similarly, if the index is greater than the maximum number of entries in the list, it will wrap back down to 0 again. And the alternative is to go to clamp, which means if it's less than 0, it will just give the 0 value, and if it's greater than the number, it will just give the maximum number. And then what it'll do, so you're going to read in the direction variable here, use that to read a value out of this list, and that value is output on the output node. And then this is simply just multiply it by 10 so that you can see what's happening, so it's not just -1 or 1 pixel. Add it to the current X and then move the objects and leave the Y untouched. So basically all of the 16 or 8 or 16 if direction equals 1, move this amount, if direction equals 2, move this amount, if direction equals 3, move this amount, is all wrapped up into a single node now, making that whole process a lot simpler. And I'm sure this is going to have other uses as well. I'm sure it's going to be a generally useful tool. It's generic enough that it can do lots of things. So just to show what this does now, if you remember, I'm cycling between -1, 1, -1, 1 as the direction variable increases, and moving it in X by 10 times 10 each time. So we start out there, every time I push and release the fire button, it moves -1, and you can see over here the direction value is going 0, 1, 2 and 3 every time. So that doesn't work on the emulator yet, so it's not part of the export. I've only done that in the last day or so I won't export and show that, but that'll be in the next release. And I think that covers it for this time round. Again, as usual, if you like what you're seeing, just leave a like, leave a comment below. Let me know what you like and don't like, or what you'd like to see, or even better, pop over to the Discord and share your ideas and thoughts over there. It's free to join. The general room is open, and there's lots of interesting chats going on in there, so pop over and see. and I'll see you next time. Thank you.